Good evening. Thank you for coming. I'll introduce myself. First of all, thank you for coming to the second session of our conference, Food and Immigrant Life, the Role of Food in Forced Migration, Migrant Labor, and Recreating Home. We had a great first panel, and I think it's been a fantastic start. So we want to keep the energy going. So what we'll do now is to move part of what we were going to do tomorrow. But before that, just give me a second to talk, about what we do here. Arian Mack, who just spoke, directs the Center for Public Scholarship, edits the Social Research Journal, in which the paper from this conference will be published, and founded the conference series in 1988. She's the Alfred and Monette Marrow Professor of Psychology at the New School for Social Research. I am Fabio Parasecoli. I'm the coordinator of the Food Studies program here. And we draw on a range of disciplines that explore the connections between food and environment, politics, media, and culture. Our faculty of culinary historians, policy activists, entrepreneurs, scientists, provide students with the theoretical and practical tools they need to engage in the developing global conversation about food. So for us, it's a great pleasure to organize this conference together with Arian. And I think we're ready with the next session. We'll have here Saru Jayaraman and Ellen Kasich. And I think we'll move the conversation in a more relaxed setting here. So we'll start with Saru Jayaraman. She's the co-founder and co-director of the Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, ROC United, and the director of the Food Labor Research Center at the University of California, Berkeley. After 9/11, together with displaced World Trade Center workers, she co-founded ROC in New York, which has organized restaurant workers to win workplace justice campaigns, conduct research and policy work, partner with responsible restaurants, and launch cooperatively owned restaurants. ROC now has 10,000 members in 19 cities worldwide. The story of Saru and her co-founder's work founding ROC has been chronicled in the book The Accidental American. Saru co-edited the New Urban Immigrant Workforce, and she's a graduate of the Yale Law School and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. She was profiled in the New York Times Public Life section in 2005 and has been named one of Crane's 40 under 40, 1010 Wins Newsmaker of the Year, and one of the New York Magazine's influentials of New York City. She authored Behind the Kitchen Door, that is coming out this year. Oh, it just come out, right? Congratulations. Today she is going to talk about migrant women's labor, and I think we're going to. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got confused. Migrant workers in the kitchen, and I think we're going to start with a video, right?
Do you eat ethically? So, do you eat ethically?
¿Y un sayorer de papas fritas? ¿Quieren guacamole o no?
Sí.
¿Y un guacamole, por favor?
La familia es muy importante.
A veces el dinero sí es necesario, pero también la familia se descontrola, ¿no? Y qué mejor con la familia, ¿no? Estamos juntos, gracias a Dios. Aquí conviviendo. Más importante.
En la mesa que nos une, ven y siéntate, Señor. Este pan que nos comemos, lo comemos en tu honor.
Pedro y Ana Valdecanto. Pedro y Ana Valdecanto.
Yo cuando las primeras veces que trabajaba en restaurante, todo el mundo cree que trabajar en un restaurante es lo mejor, que no es difícil, que es un trabajo común y corriente, pero no para las mujeres. Para las mujeres es mucho más difícil cuando uno tiene un hijo, 2 hijos, 3 hijos, y uno tiene que dejarlos en la casa, llevarlos a la escuela, quién lo va a recoger, si no tienes babysitter. A mí me ha pasado porque he trabajado en restaurantes siempre. Yo no tenía quien me cuidara a mi hijo a veces. No tenía quien lo recogiera a veces. Nunca he tenido ese gusto como muchas personas tienen de que les paguen overtime. A mí nunca me han pagado overtime. Siempre me han pagado $20 por día, 25 máximo por día. Y nunca he trabajado menos de 6 horas. Siempre he trabajado 8, 9, 10 horas. Yo no quería que mi hijo sufriera yo no quería que él sufriera lo mismo que yo. Porque es muy difícil la vida que a mí me tocó. Qué tan importantes son los padres para uno, la familia especialmente. Por eso yo siempre, mi sueño ha sido darle lo mejor a mi hijo, poder darle lo que yo nunca pude tener y que él no sufra lo que yo he sufrido. Mi bebé, mi mocho. Mi mocho.
So thank you so much for having me, to Arian and Fabio and Roberta. These films, just a word about these films. The first one, the trailer, was actually made by a restaurant worker, a leader of ours, Sekou Luke, who actually filmed the whole thing in our worker-owned, cooperatively owned restaurant called Colors, and just told it like he saw it. All of those were true stories from my book, Behind the Kitchen Door, which came out in February. And then the second was a film we made with Danny Glover's movie company, Liverture Films. They've created a series of short film portraits based on the workers and employers profiled in my book, Behind the Kitchen Door. And Maria is actually a leader in Rock, New York, and in our organization, and they made the portrait about her. So Let me just tell you a little bit about who I am first, for those of you that don't know, and then a little bit about what we're trying to do and this industry. 12 years ago, I knew none of this myself. I actually was living here in New York City. I was a labor organizer out in Long Island. I had just graduated from law school. I was working out on Long Island, organizing factory workers and custodial workers, and every evening I would come back into the city, into Brooklyn, Manhattan, and enjoy the amazing food that New York City has to offer. I lived in Brooklyn, great restaurants there. Come to Manhattan, great fusion cuisine of all kinds, wonderful, beautiful vegan food, local, organic, you name it, New York has it, of course. And I actually argue in the book that I think we as Americans eat out almost, statistically we do actually eat out more than any other people on earth. We eat out more frequently, and we tend to celebrate life's most amazing moments in restaurants. Anniversaries, birthdays, weddings. I was proposed to in a restaurant. I think everybody here could probably remember a really amazing, special moment in a restaurant. And yet, for most of us, although those same acts at home, if you think about somebody cooking, preparing your food, and serving it to you at home, it's usually done by somebody who's very intimately known to you, somebody you care about, somebody who loves you or who you love. For most of us who eat out so frequently, especially New Yorkers, most of us have very, very little idea or no idea about the people who are serving us, can remember their names, their faces, what's going on in their lives, what is happening behind the kitchen door, which is the title of my book. And I was like everybody else. I was actually a labor organizer, and even I would not know about most of the people serving my food all of those years. I didn't know their stories. I didn't know their lives. In fact, all of my life before 12 years ago, I think I can remember one restaurant worker, his name, his story, what happened to him. 12 years ago, everything changed for me, as it did for a lot of Americans. 12 years ago, 9/11 happened, and on September 11th, there was a restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center, Tower 1, called Windows on the World, on the 107th floor of Tower 1. And on that morning, 73 workers died, all of them immigrants from all over the world, because the owner of Windows on the World wanted somebody from every island nation on earth to be there so that tourists who came from anywhere to the World Trade Center would have somebody to serve them $10,000 bottles of wine in their language. And so it was an amazing restaurant, and on that morning, the 73 workers who died came from all over the world, as did the 250 workers who lost their jobs that morning in the restaurant, and the 13,000 restaurant workers who lost their jobs in the months and weeks following the tragedy. And so there was a very tiny union inside that restaurant, because less than 0.001% of all restaurant workers in America are unionized. And they called me, and they called one of the lead waiters from Windows, and together we created an organization called the Restaurant Opportunity Center that started just helping people get back on their feet, I think with 4 workers, and now has grown into a national organization with 10,000 restaurant workers. Actually, we're in 26 cities across the country. And we've grown so rapidly because of demand, because restaurant workers and employers have reached out to us from all over the country to say, we need change in this industry. And we've had some change. Over the last 12 years, we've won about 13 campaigns against very high-profile fine dining restaurant companies, winning over $7 million in stolen tips and wages, winning benefits like paid sick days and vacation days, raises, promotions, job security, grievance procedures for thousands of workers in these companies. We just won a big campaign against Mario Batali, very famous celebrity chef here in New York City. We won paid sick days for all those workers in that company and over $1 million in stolen tips and wages. We got rid of a really abusive, racist chef, and excitingly, Mario Batali has joined us as a partner in promoting something called the high road to profitability. And so that's the second thing we've done. We've actually organized about 100 employers around the country that are doing the right thing, providing good wages and good working conditions that pave the high road to profitability. They include celebrity chefs like Tom Colicchio, star of Top Chef, who's actually a great employer, all the way down to small mom and pop restaurants. We've opened our own worker-owned restaurants called Colors. The one you saw, that's not how we treat our workers. That was just staged. We opened a second worker-owned restaurant in Detroit. We train about 1,000 low-wage workers a year, immigrant workers, workers of color, to move up to livable wage jobs in the industry. We've won several, we've done tons of research, thousands and thousands and thousands of surveys of workers, NIH-funded research. We've put out about more than 24 reports at this point that have been the basis for local, state, and federal policy work. And we've had some local victories. We raised the minimum wage for tipped workers here in New York State. We just won a bill in Philadelphia that makes it illegal to deduct credit card processing fees from workers' tips, which is legal everywhere else. So I encourage you to leave your tips in cash rather than on a credit card. So we've won a lot of things, but to me, the most extraordinary thing over the last 12 years has been getting to know the stories of thousands and thousands and thousands of workers in this industry. So 12 years ago, I knew something about tipping. I think most New Yorkers think, you know, you should tip about 20%. But most New Yorkers, in fact, most Americans do not know that the tip is not just something on top of a wage, but for most workers, it is the wage because of a man named Herman Cain. Do you all remember Herman Cain? Maybe some of you are young. I don't know. You must remember Herman Cain. I was just like, what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? I'm getting old. So Herman Cain was a nominee for the Republican ticket for president in the last election. He was also previously the head of something called the National Restaurant Association, which we call the other NRA. And back in 1996, it's true, they're the 10th most powerful lobbying group in Congress. They're the NRA that's just as powerful as the other NRA, but the one that you probably haven't heard about. So the other NRA, back in 1996, under the leadership of Herman Cain, struck a deal with Congress, saying we, the NRA, will not oppose the overall minimum wage continuing to rise as long as the minimum wage for tipped workers stays frozen forever. And so it has been stuck at $2.13 an hour for the last 22 years. Now here in New York State, it's a little bit higher because of our efforts. We raised it to $5 here in New York State. But in most of the country, it's under $3 an hour. And so I didn't know this. I thought I would tip well. I had no idea that I was paying the workers' wages with my tips as opposed to placing the tip on top of the wage. I knew something about health and safety in restaurants. I grew up in California. They put letter grades in restaurants to say something about health, sanitation. I had no idea that 90% of restaurant workers in America don't have paid sick days, which means that 2/3 report cooking, preparing, and serving food while sick with H1N1, true story from my book, or the flu, or typhoid fever was the most recent worker I met who had worked with typhoid fever while working at a restaurant. On and on and on. I knew something about competition. We've all seen Top Chef and Iron Chef. I had no idea that for most immigrant workers, for most workers of color, getting to even a livable wage job in this industry is most often a matter of their skin color or their gender. There are over 10 million restaurant workers in America, and I know this conference is about the food system in general, so let me tell you, there are almost 20 million workers in the whole food system, but more than half of the 20 million workers in the food system are restaurant workers. 1 in 10 Americans works in the restaurant industry, 10 million workers. It is one of the only industries to grow over the last couple of years of economic crisis rather than decline. And yet, it happens to be the employer of 7 of the 11 lowest paying jobs in America. And the 2 lowest paying jobs in America, lower than every other occupation, according to the US Department of Labor, lower than farm worker jobs, lower than every other job you can think of as a low paying job, are guess what? Restaurant jobs. The restaurant industry is the largest and fastest growing sector of the US economy, proliferating the lowest paying jobs in America. So for those of us who care about the food system, about a good food system, about food, you have to know that the food system is not just a bad employer. It is the absolute worst employer in America. The food system and the restaurant industry in particular are the worst, statistically worst, lowest paying, providing the least benefits to workers in America, and unfortunately, they are also the fastest growing, which means we are growing our economy on the backs of the lowest paid, poorest workers in America. Servers who earn that $2.13 an hour wage. Maybe if you live and work in New York City, you might think of a server as a server at a fancy steakhouse restaurant. You think they earn a lot of money in tips. Well, most servers in America, 70% of servers in America are women. Servers in America suffer from 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the US workforce and use food stamps at double the rate of the rest of the US workforce, which means, in a terrible irony, the people who put food on our tables cannot afford to eat themselves. They use food stamps to get by. And since when, in America, does working more than a full-time job anywhere, let alone in a restaurant, end you up in such deep poverty that you are reliant on government assistance? Nobody should have to work full-time and still be reliant on government assistance. But this industry actually fights, pours millions of dollars into Congress every year, and just defeated here in New York State a bill to raise wages for restaurant workers. I don't know if you know, but 2 horrible things just happened here in New York City. Paid sick days passed at the city level, and tipped workers were excluded, which means that everybody else got paid sick days except the people who touch your food. At the state level, the minimum wage just went up for everybody except tipped workers. These workers are left out again and again and again. They're the largest industry. They're left out again and again and again because of the lobby of this incredible trade association, the other NRA. There are tons of stories I could tell. You saw some of them. I just want to tell you one. An immigrant named Claudia Munoz, who worked at an IHOP in Houston, Texas, earning $2.13 an hour. Claudia earned so little that she could not afford to eat herself. She would go to the restaurant to eat pancakes because the IHOP served pancakes, and that's all she could afford to do, is go and eat what they served. She says, "Saru, I'm afraid to admit it. I hate to admit it, but I would often flirt with the cooks so they'd give me extra food because I was so hungry when I went to work." One evening, Claudia worked a whole night shift. She got some tips. She lived off her tips because when you earn a wage of $2.13 an hour, you get a paycheck that literally says, this is not a paycheck. It's zero because your wages go entirely to taxes. So she lived on her tips. And one evening, she earned some tips. She worked a graveyard shift. And at the end of the night, a couple walked out without paying the bill. And the IHOP, mega corporation that it is, and even though it is illegal, demanded that she pay for that bill from her tips, even though the bill was $20 more than her tips, which meant that she worked a full night's shift and paid $20 for the luxury of having worked at the IHOP. And that is the story that we hear over and over and over again from our members, whether they work at a beautiful, locally sourced, organic, free-range chicken restaurant or they work at the IHOP. The story is the same because the standards are so low in this industry that people cannot afford to survive. So fortunately, there's really good news, and then I'll stop. There's really, really good news because our organization has reached a zenith point that we never thought we could. So we've been fighting this incredibly low tip minimum wage and the National Restaurant Association for the last several years. We got several bills introduced in Congress to overcome it. And then, as you all know, we were on Capitol Hill on 2/13. We go there every year on 2/13 to highlight the federal minimum wage being $2.13. We happened to be there this year when President Obama mentioned raising the minimum wage in the State of the Union and included tipped workers in the policy brief that came out from the White House. It was a big day for restaurant workers. And just a few weeks later, in February, George Miller in the House and Senator Harkin in the Senate introduced the Fair Minimum Wage Act of 2013, which for the first time in 22 years proposed overcoming the legacy of Herman Cain and re-pegging the tip minimum wage to the regular minimum wage. A wonderful moment, except it was just the introduction of a bill. And when they introduced it, they said, to overcome the power of the NRA, we are going to need to see a groundswell of public support. And we thought about that. Where have we seen a groundswell of public support? Well, in the last 12 years, we had seen a groundswell in our industry. It wasn't about workers. It was about pigs and chickens and cows. It was when a book came out called Fast Food Nation by Eric Schlosser, and another book came out called Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, and there was consumer demand across America that resulted in restaurants actually providing locally sourced, organic, free-range items on their menus. So we thought, how can we replicate that success and also partner with that exploding movement? So we created something called the Food Chain Workers Alliance, an alliance of worker organizations from farm workers all the way up to restaurant workers. We put out a consumer guide to let diners know how restaurants around them are faring on issues of wages, paid sick days, promotions. We actually also created a smartphone app that you can download for free called the ROC National Diners Guide that tells you how restaurants around you are faring. And then we wrote the book because we thought we need our Michael Pollan moment, that moment when people across America know just as much about $2.13 an hour as they do about locally sourced and organic. And the book is called Behind the Kitchen Door. Eric Schlosser wrote the foreword. Danny Glover's created a series of short films based on the book. We've beat out all the chef books on Amazon. We've made it to the top of a lot of bestseller lists. I've been doing the rounds on the TV shows. I was on CNN with Soledad O'Brien and Bill Moyers. I was just on Real Time with Bill Maher and lots of MSNBC shows. So we've been getting attention, but we haven't yet reached the New York Times bestseller list. And so we are asking 3 things of everybody who eats out in America to help us have this moment and finally change the wage and tell Congress enough is enough. The first thing is to get the book called Behind the Kitchen Door and let everybody you know about it so that we can hit the bestseller list and so that we can have that moment when people know as much about 213 and paid sick days as they do about locally sourced and organic. That's number 1. Number 2, we've created a new website and organization for everybody who eats out called The Welcome Table at thewelcometable.net. Over 100,000 people have already gone on the website to sign a petition to say enough is enough to Congress. And the third and last thing we'd like to ask of everybody here and everybody who eats is to please don't leave this room or read my book and think that the best thing that you can do is tip better. Please, tip better. But please don't think, gosh, I should just tip better and then leave it at that. Because by doing so, we continue to subsidize an industry that expects us as consumers to pay its workers' wages for it. I ask you, what other industry asks customers to pay its workers' wages for it? Or what other industry expects workers to work without a wage? That was called slavery some time ago. So we can't just tip better. Instead, we are asking that everybody speak up every time you eat out. In the same way you've asked, is this locally sourced? Is this organic? Is this vegetarian? What's in my potato? We're asking that you go to at the end of your meal, go up to the manager and say, love the food, love the service. I would love to see you provide paid sick days, or I would love to see your company pay more than $2.13 an hour. That's important to me as a customer. And if you're afraid to say it, although we really encourage you to please say it, there are tweets in the smartphone app. You can just hit send and tweet the manager and let them know that as a paying customer, you care about these issues. Because there's only one way we can see change in this industry. This industry impacts our health as consumers. It impacts, obviously, millions of migrant workers. It impacts every one of us that eats out. It even impacts employers who are trying to do the right thing. So the only way we can change it is for workers, employers, and consumers to get together and say, enough is enough. Stop listening to the corporate lobbyists. Listen to us, who care about the food system, who eat from it every day, who work in it every day, and who survive and live off the food that's provided on our tables. Thank you.
All right. We'll continue to discuss the topic of food business and how it impacts the lives of migrant workers. And so here now we have Ellen that will talk specifically about the migrant women's labor issues. Ellen Kasich was appointed Basil Turner Distinguished Professor of Management at Purdue University's Kraner School of Management, and the inaugural research director of the Susan Bulkley Butler Center for Leadership Excellence in January 2013. Ellen is also currently Associate Director of the Center for Work Family Stress, Safety and Health of the U.S. National Institute of Health, Work, Family and Health Network, an interdisciplinary national research team collaborating to implement field studies that have the goal of reducing work-family conflict as a pathway to enhance employee and family health and organizational effectiveness. She has published dozens of articles in leading journals and authored 9 books and many chapters. her book with Linda Lodge, CEO of Me, Creating a Life That Works in the Flexible Job Age, is a best-selling book on flex styles, e-working, and changing work-life patterns. So, Ellen, the podium is yours.
Side arrow.
Okay.
I know it looks funny, but
First off, I have to say, wow. Saru, you're a wonderful act to follow, and the videos are just phenomenal, and just your passion. And I have to tell just a brief story. I'm a professor, so a little different style, but I've been active in work-family research for over several decades. And most of the research you read about in the paper is, Yahoo's getting rid of telework, or lean in and you got to be, take care of your career. And migrant mothers are rarely in the discussion. And so my focus was really on work-family issues for migrant women laborers that were in Michigan. And I live, part of the time I go up by Traverse City, which is in the Great Lakes area. And Mario Batali actually flies, there's a direct flight from LaGuardia to northern Michigan. It's beautiful, there are cherries, strawberries. Just think about going through the summer, having every fruit come out, and then the vegetables. And actually, he's a wonderful person, and thank you for doing that. I also wanted to first thank Ariane and Fabio for inviting me. And I would like you just to walk away with a couple of ideas from this. And it is I thought I was going to give my paper tomorrow, so that it's got some PowerPoint and some facts from this study that we did, where we actually went to migrant worker field camps where there was something called Telemon Head Start. And this is an exciting program where there's actually Head Start located at the place where the migrant food workers are working. And if there's one thing I feel about policy in this country, it's that over the years, we have given less and less money for childcare, let alone for early education. And this was a godsend for many of these families. So that's one theme is, if we're going to be on our soapbox, this is really important to me, is that we change how we think about investment in people. The second thing is just to change how we frame and talk about immigrants and people coming to the country, moving from this idea of an individual deficit approach where the problems, and we've got to help you, speak English better or get more skills, to this idea of resource enhancement, that people really are quite resilient. And many of these women only had, most had like a 5th grade education, but they were happy and really just glad to be here. And so if we can change how we look at people, I think that's a key theme. I just have to tell you, my daughter, who's a student at Brown University, took a 1.5 years off to work for Unite Here, and she's been organizing in Boston food service workers at the university. So think about wealthy college kids and then the people that serve the food. She's been going to people's houses and putting in unions there. So for the audience, how many of you are faculty or researchers? Okay, how about students? Okay, how about people who own restaurants? Okay, who else is here? Just a few names. Who else is in the audience? AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps? Okay, who else? Great. Food Corps, okay. Okay. Oh, churches. Yeah, my daughter also worked with the Interfaith group in Chicago, that union there. Who else? Sorry? Farm? Okay. All right, well, you feel like you're back in school here? I hope not, but I do want to say also, I was just elected president of the Work Family Researchers Network. It's an interdisciplinary network. The next conference is going to be in New York City, in Times Square, June 19th to 21st in 2014, and the papers will be due in October, but if you just send me a note, I would love to have some sessions on food. I would love to have your videos there, and Work and Family, and it had 37 countries represented and some of the smartest people from economics to sociology trying to think about work and family, and I think that's an issue that unites all of us. So I just did a study working with some child development researchers. I'm a work researcher, and as I went to Yale, and I went to even got a business degree, heaven forbid, and all that. But basically I started doing more and more of my work, not only on professionals, but low-income workers. So basically, what is a migrant worker? An individual whose principal employment is 51% of the time in agriculture, at least on a seasonal basis, and they've been employed within the last 24 months. And this is a $28 billion industry, fruit and vegetables, and 85% of this is handpicked, and this was a relatively new statistic. I've been trying to update. I wrote this chapter, which is in a book on cross-cultural research on work and family. And so it's basically picking fruits and vegetables, they're processing, grading, and packaging. Okay. And it's a global phenomenon. And basically, I studied Michigan. And most of the workers in Michigan come from Texas or Florida up to Michigan. But this is a global issue. And some of the issues we have here, it affects over 100 million people worldwide, according to the ILO. So basically, we looked at this corridor, and we focused on some ideas of this two themes. One was this idea of moving away from individual deficit, but how can we provide resources to help people be successful? And look at whether people felt stressed. Because think about it, we're all stressed, right? As professionals or people working, students are stressed, or faculty, but nothing compared to someone who's probably working the field, doesn't have great child care, doesn't make a lot of money. And also, you're fitting into a culture. You're not even in your home country. So this idea of acculturative stress, I'm going to define that for you, but it's basically fitting in and a new culture as well. And so we actually went to 5 camps all over Michigan, and we did face-to-face interviews with the mothers. And Gerber Foundation did help fund this study, as well as the Michigan Child Care Partnership. And we did all the interviews in Spanish, and all of the mothers had at least one infant. So there you go, there's Michigan, and the blue is where all the migrant workers are, and we did the 5 camps. And so this idea of Telebon, it's once again in Michigan, and to qualify, you have to have a child that's 0 to 5 years old. I actually would love to have the mic if I could. Thank you. Agriculture has to be your primary source of family income. And to mobility, the family must have relocated for the purposes of engaging in agriculture in the last 24 months. And so, acculturative stress. So this is something that I didn't know about, but you think about, this is something that anybody coming to the U.S. from another culture, an immigrant, experiences. And it's basically first saying, do I fit in even into this culture? Then do I have the opportunity to achieve a better life than I would in my home country? And then what are the constraints or barriers that keep me from fitting into the mainstream? And I would say that providing childcare resources and work and family is a key way to help many people and the future generations of Americans to a better life. So I really feel we have not addressed this issue of childcare for food service workers as much as we should. We really need to put more money into this area and move away from this idea that these people have problems. Everybody has problems, but how can we give resources to help people perform better within their situation? So here was our sample. 16 to 48 years old, 70% were younger mothers, 19 to 29 years old. Very stable, more stable than the rest of the U.S. population, 97.5% married, okay? 2/3 had 1 or 2 children, 1/5 had 3 children, 1/5 had another 1/5, 20% had 4 or more, and nearly all of the infants were cared for at this Migrant Head Start Center. And as I said, most of these, 96%, only had a grade school education of 6th grade or less. And self-reported income was quite low. Now, it would be a little bit higher now, but it ranged from $70 per week to up to $600 per week. And 2/3 earned less than $300 per week. And yet, most households had 2 or more employed members, and they had worked in their jobs for at least 4 years. And over a third, this is another key issue for migrant laborers. You think about if your schedule changed every day or every other day when you had to work, how would you arrange childcare, arrange when do you go to the doctor? Over a third had their schedule change every week. And over a third were called into work at the last minute or had to work after 6 o'clock at night. Think about arranging your life if that was the constraints. And 10% did bring their infants to the field. So I have some different themes. I don't care. I can send you a copy of the paper. I'll just talk a bit about a few of the themes here. Basically, what happened with family time is that if you're asked to work 50 to 60 hours a week, you rarely get to see your children. At the same time, I looked at a sample of low-income white mothers in Michigan and welfare, and they actually got to see their children like average of 37 hours a week. And some of these mothers many saw their children sometimes 1 hour a day until the weekend. So here's one of our, and even on the weekends they're often working. One of our interviewers said, this family doesn't say much because they need the jobs, and so they don't talk to their boss, and they have to feed their children. They don't complain. They have started harvesting the tomatoes. The women work together with the men picking the tomatoes. At 5 p.m., the men can go home. And then the women are asked to work in the shed to sort and pack the tomatoes. Some of the women that I've interviewed have told me that they'll be starting to work from 6 a.m. until 9:30 to 10 p.m. They say they're so tired at night that they don't even get to see their children. And that is something that a lot of families do that have the two parents together, is the couples don't have much couple time together, but they share childcare, basically like just trading off the kids as they move. So the shifts, once again, also the mother and father actually misspoke, spend time together only 1 hour a week, they said, some of them. So it's kind of distressing. If we're trying to build families and we care about all this, we're not really helping families who are poor immigrants. But the bright spot, all these women, I mean, maybe it was probably bias sample a little bit and that they were all getting Head Start, but they were so grateful for this. Here's a quote. I'm so happy for the fact that this state, there's free childcare for the children. That wasn't the case in Florida. And the family was considering settling down in Michigan, even though they hated the cold. Think of the Michigan and New York winters for the childcare. That to me says it part of it all. And it was really a bright spot, and it was a resource that we should really be investing in. Children's education is obviously very much neglected or inconsistent. If the family's moving a lot, a mobile lifestyle, children usually start the school in the farming location and then travel back to their home base to continue their school for the winter months and taken out of school. And so the struggle for the family's economic stability forces the migrant lifestyles to revolve around working, and there's less time to have a stable education. In our Latino sample, 5% had moved 4 or more times. And about half had moved 2 or 3 times in the past year. So children are finding themselves enrolled in a different school every year. Sometimes they have 14 to 15 schools by the time they're grown up. And then also many of the schools and communities didn't quite understand the mobile migrant culture, but the Head Start actually once again was thought to be well done. And part of the philosophy of Telemann, and I'm not a spokesman for Telemann at all, but they do try and involve the family a bit more, I think, than some programs in the decision making. And so I just think, but they did find 2/3 of the children, one study of migrant farm workers had 1 or more psychiatric disorders, with anxiety being most prevalent. So they're causing some family anxiousness about not knowing when you're going to see your parents. Now, supervisor support. I know you think it sounds like a kind of white collar concept, but this is something that I've been working on in a study with grocery store workers in Michigan. I did a study that was actually featured on NPR, and it was actually cited in a White House economic report, and won one of the best papers of the year, where we went into grocery stores and we taught supervisors 4 family supportive behaviors. One was just to say hello in the morning to workers so you could at least know what was going on that day. Think about it. How is somebody going to tell you my babysitter didn't show up if your boss isn't even saying hello? The other behavior we taught people was to make it okay to have schedule changes or shift trades. role model, teaching the supervisors to talk about their own families in the grocery store. And the last issue was just trying to be creative and cross-train workers, and just training managers to see, or supervisors at grocery stores, or in this case at the migrant camps, to think that family was important, can do things like reduce depressive symptoms, and can also make people feel better about their whole life. So family is increasingly a lever to motivate people. And then most of these people obviously are living in poverty, making 70% made less than $300 a week. And I'm going to shift now to this idea of resilience. That compared to our low-income white worker sample, most of these workers who did not have sick leave, did not have health care, felt overall positive and grateful for this Head Start program. And so to me, it's like, what a way to help people feel better about our country. So for research, I would like to see us focus more on interventions that will help migrant workers, help grocery store workers, help restaurant workers, help all food service workers combine breadwinning with caregiving. I think that that leads to everything from the ability for children to go to school, for the ability for people to provide for their family, just for the ability for a better life. And some new work that has come out, I did a search to see what were some of the new studies, and there was an interesting study I found called Invisible Children. And this report reflects the fact that their research found that there's so little information regarding the children of migrant and seasonal farm workers who feed our nation. So I would like to see more research and policy focusing on the children and the mothers. And so thank you very much, and I hope this is a great conference. I'm sure it will be.
All right, great. So questions, comments? We don't see very well from here, but we'll try. Okay. Can you go and talk over the on the microphone so that we can record the question? Thank you.
Start up. My question is to you, Saru. In New York City, we are experiencing a lot of out in the street cart vending. The food tends to be delicious, but noticing the sickness and the lack of health services for this population of workers, are you guys planning to sort of extend your services to this kind of population? Because they are mostly Arabs, and now for some reason the Mexicans were doing an ingrow. They're here before, but the Arabs have been very aggressive. And my question is, are you guys gonna extend some sort? Because actually the people love the food, but there's also the lurking threat of sickness and things like that. That happens in restaurants and food industries.
Hello? Yeah. First, I have to apologize. Speaking of childcare, I have a 9-month-old who's sick, and I'm not going to be able to stay that late. I'm sorry, I apologize. So I'm going to have to leave shortly. But to answer your question, there is already actually a program that works with street vendors called the Street Vendor Project through the Urban Justice Center here in New York City, and they do great work.
And they will be here tomorrow.
Okay, great. So, part of the difficulty is that they're independent contractors, right? They are their own employers, each of them. They're not employees of anybody. And so an ordinance like a paid sick days law, which could cover restaurants or anybody who employs other people, you couldn't penalize a street cart vendor force a self-employed person to take a sick day, right? Because they're their own boss, they're their own employee. But I do think, just to note, the restaurant industry is obviously much larger than that. It's the largest conveyor of food to the public. And so at the very least, those workers should be covered. And right now, the bill that was just passed in New York City, the way that it exempts restaurant workers is that it essentially creates what's called a shift swapping provision. So it allows the employer to say to the worker, instead of taking a paid sick day, just swap your shifts with somebody else. And so that essentially is telling restaurant workers they don't have paid sick days. I mean, would you tell a lawyer, oh, you're sick today? Just come in on Saturday. You don't have to come in today, right? Or another professional. Maybe you would tell that to a lawyer. I don't know. But generally, we don't tell that to professionals, right? Whereas with restaurant workers, somehow the idea is, oh, if you're sick today, just come in, swap your shift, come in on another day, which is essentially penalizing them for being sick as opposed to actually paying them a full day when they need to take a day off, which is not just actually about their own health. It's also about their children, being able to take a day off to take care of a sick child. I'll just give you one quick story. We have a member from LA who worked at McDonald's or Burger King, one of the two, I can't even remember. And her daughter, 12-year-old daughter, had a heart attack one day. You know, very uncommon 12-year-old heart attack, and she was not able to take a day off from McDonald's or Burger King because there's no paid sick days. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, she stayed for a couple of hours, and after a while she just, I have to go, and she lost her job. But that happens to restaurant workers on a daily basis. They have to choose between their job and their own health or the health of their children.
Are you going to be here tomorrow?
I will try to be here tomorrow, yes. Okay.
I want to just say I agree with you 100% that we need to get paid sick days for workers. But I do think in the gap between that, many companies will fire workers for having to miss, and they don't allow shift trades, and their discipline policies are, as you know, written for absenteeism. So as an in-between until the law is passed, I think training, you know, supervisors, you got to pay for sick leave, but in the meantime, learn how to manage your restaurant or grocery store, whatever, that workers can trade shifts. Management has to first allow it. So I agree with you 100%, but a lot of times they'll just get disciplined, and so they're not even allowed to trade even if they can. So to me, that's a middle ground, but not where we want to go.
Yeah.
Can you, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenna Characello. Thank you both so much. I was just in Detroit, and we heard from some folks involved with colors there. So I serve with Food Corps up in Maine, and some of the students in my class, so that's school garden, food, education program. So some of my students, their parents are migrant workers. Many of my students, their parents are restaurant workers. And in addition to teaching the youth that I teach how to garden, how to grow food, how to cook food, teaching food justice and teaching exactly what you just discussed is something that I want to do. And was hoping you could point me in the direction of some resources. And I feel more equipped now to sort of be sensitive to some of the issues they might deal with in their families. But now, how do I approach teaching food justice through these two issues?
So I mentioned that we created something called the Food Chain Workers Alliance, which is an alliance of food workers throughout the food system, and I started something called the Food Labor Research Center at UC Berkeley to support the alliance. And as an alliance and as the center, we put out a report called The Hands That Feed Us, which was based on more than 600 surveys of restaurant workers throughout the food system. So farm workers, processing workers, food, chicken, meat and poultry processing workers, food retail and distribution, grocery store workers, restaurant workers, and put out this whole big report. We also surveyed about 50 employers throughout the food system and found some amazing things. So that report is online. It's called The Hands That Feed Us. Mark Bittman actually wrote about the report in the New York Times, so we got a lot of attention for it. And then the second resource is my book, Behind the Kitchen Door, which I think is very accessible. It's not meant, it's based on thousands of surveys and very academically rigorous research, but is really meant to be a consumer-friendly book. It's stories of restaurant workers and their lives interspersed with the data on the industry. So,
I've been part of a $30 million study by the National Institute of Health that's partnered with Harvard Med School to family and child development departments. I was the workplace intervention group. And I think one other resource, and we're going to be putting these online, is some training for employers. I think that we got to go the legal route, but given we can't even pass a gun control law, I think the other thing is to find employers that need to be educated, and they need help. I mean, these grocery store managers, for the first study I did, some of them were, weren't bad people. They were just like, $5 away from being the workers that they supervise, and they hadn't had training. And so it will be posted online to the National Institute of Health. We have this family supportive supervisor training. I'm even doing it now with veterans, people hiring veterans. And then the other thing is just teaching how to redesign the workplace so that people can have flexibility, change your discipline, change your sick leave. So I think I think we have to document what's wrong, but I've been moving at over time, not just studying what's wrong because it gets very depressing, is looking at how can you add resources to change the workplace. And you can show experiments that people have lower depression, less likely to turn over. It affects the bottom line. And so find employers that are willing to be pilot studies to try and organize work a different way, because the way the work is organized, the structure of work affects people's family issues. Yet in the US society, we look at family as an individual issue. Your problem, you're late, you're undereducated, you're sick. That's what I meant by the discipline or deficit approach. Let's change the workplace to really be a positive influence, and we're finding in our studies that just organizing work a little bit easier, to think about all we have to do in in any day, makes people feel better about their jobs, feel better about families, feel better about life. That's going to benefit America and everyone.
It's about greed.
And actually, I've been working with Rock NYC, and one activity that they do is actually this round table where employers and workers get together to find solutions, create models that then can be taught to other employers. Because we hosted a panel here at the New School last month, actually, and many employers really had questions like, how do I manage, the spreadsheet for the working hours? So they need very practical guidance. So if there are these resources around, I think it might be easier and there might be more response to that.
I actually have some exciting news about that. I was just in Congress yesterday. We brought employers from around the country to announce the formation of our own National Restaurant Association, which is called RAISE, Restaurants Advancing Industry Standards and Employment. And we did a big congressional briefing together with George Miller and Donna Edwards in the House. And employers came out from around the country to say the National Restaurant Association doesn't speak for us. We as employers think you can actually have reduced turnover, increased productivity, increased profitability if you treat your workers well. And then we've actually been able to document that. We did a study that the Ford Foundation funded called Taking the High Road, which actually documented how for our employers these high road practices have reduced turnover, increased productivity, and increased profitability. Oops.
Hi, my name's Dania Lopez, and I work for Sanctuary for Families. I'm an immigration attorney with them, and I see a lot of these issues with my clients all the time. But I'm particularly interested, given both of your work, what ideas you guys have to deal with sexual abuse and sexual harassment in the kitchen and restaurants, or even in the fields picking crops and stuff. I know it's a huge problem, so I was just wondering what advocacy or ideas, what's already being done, or what you think should be done.
Well, I'm sure you'll have something to say as well. Part of the work I've been doing is led me to work with an occupational health psychologist. Does anybody know about occupational health psychology? It's a really different way about thinking about the workplace. So obviously we need systems for grievance for people that have been harassed after the fact, but occupational health says don't just focus on the people that are going to have the problems, but let's improve the workplace for everyone. So if we wanted to improve safety, to make it harassment free, let's proactively make it so untenable that these acts cannot even happen, from education, from making it out front that people are going to lose their job if they treat other people with incivility. And so this takes this proactive approach. And I think pulling together a few employers that want to take the high road, that makes it this progressive people practice, and people want to be thought of as good employers. And so it's occupational health. Don't wait for it to happen. Be out front and saying, for education, this is how you have to manage your workplace. And it does, I've been in nursing homes also. I've been in a lot of low income, and there's a lot of harassment there and families and whatever, and it's this, don't let it happen. And so part of it is this education, and then having the employer make it that they're going to fire people that, not even going to warn you, zero tolerance.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In our industry, it's just so extraordinarily commonplace. So when the whole scandal broke out about Herman Cain, again, if you remember, he had actually he was accused of having harassed people at the National Restaurant Association. At that time, research came out showing that 37% of all sexual harassment complaints in the U.S. come from the restaurant industry, even though only 7% of American women work in the restaurant industry. So it is the largest single perpetrator of sexual harassment in the U.S., and unfortunately, the most young women, who go into this, and most young people start in the restaurant industry. It's the biggest industry that young people start in, and this is a young woman's exposure to the world of work. This is how they think the world of work is. In fact, I'm on a 30-city book tour, and I happened to stop through University of Chicago, and I spoke there, and a young woman raised her hand and said, "I don't understand why you talk as if these things are extraordinary or outrageous." I had told a story about sexual harassment, and I said to her, "It's outrageous to me that you don't think it's outrageous. It's outrageous that this is so commonplace for you, that this is just the way the industry is, that you think it's normal, that you think this is the way work is in America." So the way we've attacked it has been, number one, to name it, to tell stories about it, to say, actually, this is sexual harassment, because most people don't know that that's actually what it is, that it's illegal. And then to both, our work is, as you know, fighting the low road and promoting the high road. So with the low road, we've had campaigns against very large, high-profile restaurant companies, suing them and getting them to do the right thing, organizing workers to stand up and say enough is enough. So we had a big campaign against the Fireman Hospitality Group, which was all the restaurants surrounding Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center here in Midtown Manhattan. Red Eye Grill, a bunch of restaurants. Cafe Fiorello, a bunch of those restaurants. They're all owned by the same guy, and all had rampant sexual harassment claims. And the workers, women would say that they were asked to sleep with managers to move up, to a bartender, on and on and on. I could go on and on. And there we fought and won. We got a new anti-sexual harassment policy, a promotions policy for the women. It was great. We won like $4 million in both discrimination claims, sexual harassment, all this. But at the same time, we've worked with our members to create, some of our female members came up with a program to work with employers that were willing to partner with us to change their practices, where they actually did these role plays where they had managers take the role of a worker and worker, kind of very similar to what you're talking about, and then actually experience what it's like to be called something or touched in a certain way or hurled at an epithet, how it made them feel. And so we've done these trainings with employers and workers and managers, and it's had some impact, but in our opinion, it has to be about both creating consequences for the very large, greedy corporations, and at the same time, and everybody, because it isn't just the large greedy corporations that engage in this behavior, it's frankly the whole industry. And at the same time, working with those that are willing to work with us to train them in a different way of doing business.
And it's important to remember that the problem of gender discrimination in the industry goes all the way up to the chefs. If you talk to women chefs, first of all, there are very few of them, very few to this day.
1 in 5 chefs are women.
It's more difficult to get loans. It's more difficult to get respected by purveyors. simple stuff like that, or getting your rent renewed. We also recently invited women chefs to talk about their experiences, and their challenges are completely different from what their male peers experience. So if that happens at the chef level, you can just imagine what happens, in the lower echelons of the system.
Hi, my name is Trisha. I'm a graduate student at Tufts, and I actually have a question. I'm really interested in the Food Labor Research Center at Cal, and
Sorry.
So, and a lot of the things that you're describing, like people of color and women having a harder time getting promotions and being unequally discriminated against comparatively, it really is like systemic to me, and I am curious to know, Ellen, your research is really great, but I'm wondering, like, they're all cogs in a chain, and the Food Chain Workers Alliance is probably talking a little bit about that, but I'm interested to know, like, what sort of opportunities there are for like consciousness raising amongst workers, because it really is about a system that's trying to keep vast majority of our population oppressed, to me.
Do we have time to answer this? Or?
I think so. We can answer this.
So there is a $4 wage gap between white workers and workers of color in the restaurant industry. There's such, I show that trailer, that first trailer that Sekou made, and people always notice, 213, the guy who's sick. I ask people, what impacted you? What did you see? And they comment on the wages and the sickness. But something that Sekou specifically did in the trailer that people often don't notice because it's so commonplace, again, in our industry, is the fact that the further back you go in the restaurant, the darker the skin color gets. And that is so pervasive in our industry, so stark and so severe, and most people don't even notice it. In many cities like Miami, literally the further back you go, the darker the skin gets. The wait staff is often light-skinned Cuban or white. The bussers and runners are often Latino. The dishwashers are always Haitian, always. And so what we did is we did a study where we sent 200 pairs of white and people of color applicants into fine dining restaurants undercover, with the people of color having slightly better resumes. And we found that white applicants had twice the chance of a person of color of getting one of these jobs. We also gave accents to both white European accents and people of color with third world accents. We found that for the white workers, having a European accent was a bonus in getting a job. For the person of color, it was obviously a detractor. And so what we're now replicated these studies around the country, because to document discrimination, this is really the only way. Match pairs audit testing is really the only way.
So our speakers here, but I just want to say I've also done workplace interventions with coworkers, and we teach them to get rid of sludge, which is like saying mean things about other coworkers and helping them. So you got to help make a team as well.